This one? Oh, here we go. Here we go. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. We do have a very special group every year. I'm always blessed when Michelle Boatwright, who brings down a group of outstanding ladies for Addiction Awareness Day at the Capitol, which happens to be today. And they have always been a blessing for me to share their testimonies, their stories. So I just wanted to recognize them. If they'll stand, Michelle Boatwright, who leads the group, and her daughter, who goes to school with my little girl, Victoria Boatwright, Kristen Castle, Tammy Gray, Janice Hood, Lexi Cleveland, Keisha Brown, and then also Lindsay Sizemore, right here, who is paying it forward. Lindsay works with the Georgia Mental Health Consumer Network as a peer forensic mentoring training project coordinator. And then I'm also proud to have my Douglas County State Court Judge, Eddie Barker, here. Judge Barker, if he'll stand up. Judge Barker, and I've had opportunity to speak to the DUI drug court that he runs in Douglas County, which has changed hundreds of lives. It's a very successful program, and I'm proud to have him today. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. And that's the DUI court is an alternative court. So, Judge, thank you for being here today. I know that taking time out of your schedule means you're actually taking your time away from those that you're helping get through a process, a difficult process, challenging process, one that requires endurance and perseverance, has high levels of accountability as associated with accountability courts, and that in doing so, Micah has told me that you go above and beyond the call of duty, and the things that you require of the families and those that go through your court are both life-changing and serve as a good instrument of how the justice system can administer justice both to the families and to the community, and I want to extend my gratitude to you. Thank you for being here. I just want to remind our committee of just a couple of things that we have. I think this is just helpful to reflect on what our responsibility is as appropriators. The Constitution clearly sets forth under Section 9, this is under Article 3, Section 9. Article 3 is the legislative branch of government. Section 9 deals with appropriations, and paragraph 1 tells us that no money shall be drawn from the Treasury except by appropriations made by law. And that's what we're doing. So the revenues that come in are set aside in the Treasury, and it's our job to appropriate them by law. Part of that responsibility is specifically that the General Assembly shall annually appropriate those state and federal funds necessary to operate all various departments and agencies. General Assembly. That's our job. And I mean for you to take it very seriously. Also, be aware that the General Assembly shall, by general law, provide for the regulation and management of the finance and fiscal administration of this state. Those are two of our constitutional responsibilities and duties, and I hope that we will perform them well today and tomorrow and the days ahead as we set this budget. With that, what I'd like to do is ask for, with the Georgia Commission on Family Violence, Ms. April Ross is here today to join us and present on behalf of the Commission. It's an honor to have her, and I'm glad she could join us today. Would you use the mic over here by the podium? Good. Yes, absolutely. Come forward, and we'll put you on that mic there. I hope you'll draw your attention to Ms. Ross. This can be found in section 18.5 of the governor's book. It's also page 136 of the governor's big book, and section 18.5 on your track sheets. Ms. Ross, thank you so much for being here today. I apologize for the inconvenience of that podium there, but we are honored to have you here, and we are looking forward to hearing your budget.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I, again, am April Ross. I'm the relatively new Executive Director of the Georgia Commission on Family Violence, and I'm happy to be here this afternoon to present to you a little bit about our budget proposals. So, a little bit about the Commission. It was created in 1992 by the Georgia General Assembly, and the purpose that we were created for was to study and evaluate the needs and services in Georgia related to family violence and to create interventions for those. And through that, we also evaluate and monitor the effectiveness of the existing family violence laws, and we also recommend and propose new legislation as needed and work with those parties necessary to make that happen. Additionally, we have a lot of key projects that our commission is responsible for putting forward every year in Georgia. One of those is the statewide annual Family Violence Conference, a conference that has grown tremendously over the years, brings in professionals from many different backgrounds to who intersect with victims and people who are involved in family violence and who have the opportunity in Georgia to help us improve safety for people and families that are facing abuse. So in addition to that, we also have family violence intervention programs. Those are one of the key projects we have in Georgia for addressing and hopefully remediating batterer behavior by addressing the value system and belief system that leads people to choose to be abusive to intimate partners and family members. We also have the responsibility of creating models and working with communities to build family violence task force. So we have those throughout the state, and those are community models that help to create responses to family violence, provide resources to victims, and work with those others that, that provide services to victims and families. We also have something that's relatively new in our commission, which is the Support for Survivors of Murder-Suicide Project. And I'll just say, for the record, I am particularly fond of that program, being a survivor myself of an attempted murder-suicide. And that's an exciting project that is looking to develop resources and responses throughout communities specifically to surviving family members in the wake of that kind of tragedy, which is unique and has unique circumstances. And finally, each year we also have the Georgia Fatality Review Project, where we look at the number of family violence-related fatalities every year, and we address or we create and decide on responses that are appropriate to kind of reduce those numbers. Our goal in Georgia would be to obviously have no family violence homicides, but we want to improve Georgia's rank nationally in terms of the rate at which people are killed by intimate partners. So with that, I'll turn into our budget. Our state funds budget, if you're following along in our presentation, about 80% of our budget right now is allocated to our personnel. We're not a large agency, but we're small but mighty, as I say. And so that's the bulk of our budget. We also have about 6% of our budget that is related to our operating expenses, 2% equally to computer and technology, telecommunications, and finally about 11% goes to our contracts. And the contracts we engage in are primarily for us to provide trainings for family violence intervention program providers and facilitators. That's the key way that we teach and manage the curriculum that they use to remediate, again, those that have been referred to that program through courts and through the TPO process to have an intervention. So with the proposed budget cuts for 2020, FY 2020, what we did as an agency, we looked at limiting our travel and renegotiating those contracts, either through changing the number of trainings we contract out, or either reducing the size of those trainings so that we can still provide the trainings, but maybe adjusting how many or how frequently they are provided. The other thing we've looked at is reducing staff travel. Our staff typically travel to monitor our family violence intervention programs and also to specifically conduct trainings and interventions in communities that need additional resources and services and support from us. And in addition to those changes, we also proposed submitting, we reduced our landlines. We had 9 landlines in our agency, and we reduced those to, we dropped 8 of those lines, and we now have 1 main line that we use. That resulted in a $3,700 savings in our budget. Additionally, we are terminating the lease on our Ricoh printer, and that's about a $2,000 savings. So collectively, that's about $5,700 that we would not have to reduce, allows us to not reduce from our contracts, to help us not have to cut back as much in the contracts and services that we provide. And so that's the proposed budget for FY 2020 and 2021. Any questions for me?
Yes, Director Ross, I have a few questions, and the committee members may as well. In terms of the reductions made to training, you had mentioned the victim suicide scenarios. In your experience, do those often involve individuals with mental health problems or that may be in need of mental health treatment?
In my experience and through our research, while in some instances there may be a mental health component, we don't find that that's overwhelmingly the case. So, so to answer your question, no, not necessarily.
And with association with domestic violence, are there addiction issues that play into it, abuse of alcohol or drugs? Again,
our research tells us that while there are instances where some abusers may also have substance abuse issues, there are, I mean, I guess to put it frankly, there are many people who abuse substances who do not batter partners, so we don't necessarily see substance abuse as a component that contributes to the tendency to be abusive.
And what amount of counseling do the centers provide for those that have been the victims of family violence?
So when we deal with appropriate responses to victims of family violence, counseling is one of the services that I think the state of Georgia provides. I know that, and just speaking frankly, the CJCC through the Victim Compensation Fund provides an opportunity for people to get counseling. Our support for survivors of murder-suicide creates a protocol that calls for group counseling and group services as well as individual counseling, and we try to work with the communities to find ways to provide that to those survivors. But counseling is an effective tool for victims who have experienced abuse and family members who have experienced abuse or loss of a loved one.
And to what extent does the travel and the training that you provide or that is provided to individuals within your organization, does that training tie into the counseling? Does that training tie into their ability to administer aid to the families that are the victims?
So our trainings are, I'll say they're twofold. In one respect, our trainings are directly to the intervention programs to create to teach the models that we recommend to the providers and facilitators so that they're effectively addressing and remediating the abuser's behaviors when someone's sent to those programs. The other trainings that we provide are for our community task forces so that they are creating a protocol and appropriate responses within their communities. Obviously, from sitting in Metro Atlanta, we're not able to be the resource to everyone directly, but we can teach everyone how to be the resource in their own communities, and that's what we strive to do. And what we find is that our task forces, our intervention program providers, and I guess people throughout the state who intersect with victims of family violence constantly reach to us and rely on us and ask us to come and provide training and support in what they're developing to respond in their own communities.
Okay. And how do these adjustments in the budget affect that training?
One of the things I thought when we looked at it and realized we would basically not be able to do as much travel and provide, which means fewer trainings. We're looking at opportunities to try to create virtual training models. I'll tell you that rural Georgia will have some challenges with that, but it is one option for us to try to create virtual training models. We don't necessarily want to do kind of just the pull up a webinar and watch it and you learned it, because it's really important that we address some of the questions, because a lot of times understanding the dynamics of family violence require us to have that dialogue with the people that we're training and bringing resources to. So we're looking to find ways to try to see if we can virtually not have to limit services that way.
Okay. Representative Williams.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Director Ross.
Thank you.
You answered part of my question just a minute ago when I was going to ask you about the implications for rural Georgians. You already have a small department,
Yes.
and there's one thing about abusiveness. It's not confined to the city.
No.
And so it gives me great pause when I think about remote areas in Georgia. And training is so crucial in your department. And again, not being in Atlanta can be very expensive. And so when I think about the rural areas in my part of Georgia and southeast Georgia, that's tough. And in my county of Liberty, and by the way, 3 weeks ago it was said we have the highest military density in America. Because of that density, a lot of people come to our area that are indirectly connected. And a lot of problems occur. Needs are great. We're fortunate in that we're a rural county, but we have a few more services in some counties. But I can go 2 or 3 counties over, and that's not the case. I'm really concerned about the human costs for saving some secular dollars, really.
Yes, and our studies have shown us, when we looked at, we have a data enhancement project as well, where we're looking deeper and drilling deeper into those numbers of homicides, family violence homicides, and we found that some of the rural counties in Georgia have the highest number of family violence deaths per capita, when you look at it per capita. And so we are trying to be judicious in how we choose where we go, but obviously we find the need for law enforcement training to be crucial, for the community task forces in those areas to be very strong and robust, and for their protocols and their responses, and for the intervention programs to be effective. We want to obviously stay connected, well connected to those areas, and so we're, I guess, going to be really evaluating how and where we actually physically deploy, but in general, we will have to find ways to do it virtually or remotely.
Just follow up, when you say virtual, we already struggle with broadband access in rural Georgia. It's going to be, unless you can come up with a beam me down, Scotty, it's going to be kind of tough to come into rural Georgia, where we struggle with even school assignments, to now be able to do virtual training.
I guess what you're asking is virtual even viable?
Yeah, is it viable?
That's something I don't know. It hasn't been done before, obviously, in our agency, and with me being relatively new, I'm still kind of learning how we work. But it was one of the only options us as the staff developed as possibly being able to address any reductions we have to make in the number of I guess, contract services we can send out and the number of times we can send staff.
If the cuts remain in place, I think it would be helpful to try to redirect those attentions to the rural areas. And if you're going to make the travel, that's where the travel probably should be.
Down there.
Yes, I agree. Thank you.
Thank you.
Any other questions from members of the committee? I have a light on. Mr. Green?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for what you're doing. This is something that Representative Williams and the rest of us share in the rural areas. This further isolates us as to the issues that we're faced with. There has been an uptick in regard to family violence and abuse, substance abuse in the rural areas. And we were just beginning to move in that direction and trying to help our law enforcement people, because that was the only place that we were going to. They were arresting them. They have no place to put the mentally ill, those that need those substance abuse. They are limited. So Mr. Chairman, I think this is something that we're going to have to look at very hard and try to come up with something to keep from isolating the rural areas there. The Rural Development Council, which I'm a part of, and several others in here, we noted this in our studies this year of communities, and certainly we need to look at this and see what we can do. Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, I appreciate those comments. Ms. Ross, thank you so much for being here today. Thank you to your staff. We appreciate that. Thank you for the information that you provided us. And so, seeing that there are no other questions, we'll move on to the next item on our agenda, which is going to be the Department of Defense.
Thank you.
We have our Adjutant General, Tom Carden, and his staff are here today. Just for references to members on the committee, we'll be under Section 20 of your budget. So just turn a couple pages further in your track sheet, and you'll be there. If you're following along on the big budget, we're going to be at page 149. And before the tag speaks, I didn't mean to say something at the very beginning of this meeting. The Attorney General's office was very responsive to our request yesterday, providing us with all the information we requested. I think there's a few clarifications we're working out, but they were highly responsive. I think we received those comments back either last night or very early this morning, and my appreciation to Attorney General Carr for that responsiveness. I fully expected it and didn't have any doubt that we would get that information. I also note that the Prosecuting Attorney's Council also provided us with the salary breakdowns and schedule that that Representative Holcomb had asked for. So I think Courtney has that information as well. We've been okay. So she can send that out by email to all the members. The Department of Defense is under Section 20, page 12 of your 2021 budget, and I don't think there's anything under the 20 amended, so we'll be focusing on that. Is that correct?
Okay. Good afternoon, Chairman Welch, members of the committee. Thank you for allowing me to brief you today on the Georgia Department of Defense budget for the remainder of 20, as well as the budget for 2021. Our overall budget before we started the 4% and 6% cuts was $12.7 million. Thanks to our great financial management team, we found a way to absorb the reductions without losing any employees or furloughing any employees. For the 2020 budget, we cut a total of $510,445 from our budget, meeting a 4% reduction target. We did this by converting a state position to a 100% federally funded position. And we took an additional cut of $474,075 in the youth education services. Thankfully, and thanks to a large extent to this committee, our Youth Challenge Academy campus at Fort Gordon is getting a much needed upgrade. As such, we had to reduce student capacity during the construction phase that will take us through both the 2021 and perhaps partway through 2022. Matching our graduation target with our capacity allowed us to cut $218,359 from our Fort Gordon campus. So in addition, we reduced our graduation target at the Millersville campus to match our projected enrollment for that campus. It enabled us to cut another $255,716 from the Millersville campus. Again, the total cuts for 2020, $510,445. With respect to the 2021 budget, again, starting from the top line figure, $12.7 million, we cut $10,275 from our overall administrative cost. Again, the converted position that I mentioned earlier saved us $36,370, and we cut an additional $19,471 from our military readiness operational expense line. Just as with the 2020 budget cuts, we matched our capacity with projected enrollments at both Fort Gordon and at Milledgeville. At Fort Gordon, we cut $322,340 and $377,486 from our Milledgeville campus. The total of those cuts for the 2021 budget was $765,667. So starting with the top line, $12.7 million, and we came in at just under $12.1 million at the end with the 6% budget for the 2021 budget. I believe we did a responsible job in meeting our budget target while minimizing the impact on our most important asset, and that's our people. I'd like to say thanks to Governor Kemp and his staff for supporting a bond issue totaling $8 million, $6 million of which will be allocated to renovating armories, and $2 million of which will be allocated toward maintaining and upkeep of our facilities. So thank you all for what you have and continue to do to support your National Guard. Subject to your questions, that concludes my brief, sir.
Thank you, Tag. We appreciate you being here. I appreciate your service to our country and to our state.
It's an honor, sir.
Also, we appreciate the men and women that serve under you.
Yes, sir.
I know that Representative Williams has some questions to ask you. I'll let him go ahead and ask those questions. I have a few to follow up regarding both the Fort Gordon and Milledgeville facilities.
Yes, sir.
Thank you, General. Good to see you. Good to see your staff.
Great to see you, sir.
A couple of years ago, we did a 17% salary increase for cadre and staff. Much needed. The cadre, most of them are retired, former military. They can do a lot better at some other jobs that are available. I'm concerned about the long haul now. After the 17% and, hopefully down the road, what does the future look like for, the retention and keeping of good staff? I know at the Milledgeville facility, it's not as easy to get military background cadre at Milledgeville as it is in Augusta or Fort Stewart. But I want to know from the cuts, and you're blessed because of the federal money.
Yes, sir.
I mean, it would have been catastrophe, I think, without that you're able to shift some federal money. But I'm concerned, what about down the road for salaries, cadre, and staff? How will this affect you in retention?
Well, obviously, employee pay, particularly with the great job environment we have here in Georgia, we're competing for talent just like every other business and every other state agency. So it's a challenge for us. I mean, an entry-level salary of most of those employees is around $27,000 a year. I'm very thankful, and the governor's included a $1,000 pay raise for employees making less than $40,000 a year. I think that tool in our kit in the budget is going to help us a little bit with respect to recruitment and retention. I think it's something we're going to have to evaluate year to year. Now, we looked in preparation for this hearing at some of our chronic vacancies we've carried for a while. And I was actually surprised. We're able to recruit pretty good for our Youth Challenge campuses. Retention seems to be the challenge with respect to us. I think we're doing a pretty good job with respect to recruitment, and we've got some challenges with retention. I think this $1,000 will help. And, you're not going to find anybody out there that don't want more people, more time, and more money. But as a leader, we just got to be responsible to make sure we're giving you a good return on investment for every tax dollar that you allocate. And if you look at our agency overall, for every one state dollar you put against Georgia DOD, we return 46 of your federal tax dollars to the state. Many of these Youth Challenge employees, all of them in fact, are 75% funded by the federal government. It costs us $15,000 in total to educate one young man or woman in a Youth Challenge campus. The state's burden for that one child is $3,750 per graduate. Now, if you compare that with what you have to pay to put one child in the RYDC for a year, you can either pay $90,000 to put them there, or we can take a chance on trying to educate them at $3,750 a young man or woman. So while I always want to give you a better product, as does the entire DOD team, we're rowing hard every day to try to make use of every dollar that you all allocate to us.
Great.
I hope I answered your question, sir.
You did. Thank you.
All right, Vice Chairman Rogers.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Gentleman Cardin, appreciate you being here today.
Yes, sir.
Appreciate the job that you and troops are doing, and you're constant in our thoughts and prayers, especially those that are overseas. So thank you.
Thank you, sir.
I'm gonna switch to the civilian component of it, the State Defense Force, which,
yes,
by the way, I'm a big fan of.
Yes, sir.
I know for the longest time, if you looked at the amount of volunteer hours that we got out of that group, we had a pretty good return on investment because there wasn't much money involved.
Yes, sir.
Over the course of the last couple of years, it's grown. I think in 2017, I think it was about $50,000, and then in 2019, we added another $50,000 in, so it was about $100,000. And then last year, we took it out, but it came back in plus another 25. So you're somewhere probably around $125,000 on it for the State Defense Force. Are we in a position now where we still need that much money, or tell me where we are with this group? And then also, I know that we were doing some things with equipment. Is the equipment up to date, or are we still constantly monitoring that and maintaining that with money, or where do we stand with the whole group?
Well, sir, I'm glad you asked that question because it gave me an opportunity to say something great about your Georgia State Defense Force. The The members of the Georgia State Defense Force, they buy their own uniforms. They give unselfishly of their time and talent. So, in terms of return on investment, I think you're getting a great bang for the buck with your Georgia State Defense Force. With respect to the dollars, I actually think that the numbers last year in the governor's budget was around $169,000, I recall. I think this year you'll see that it's grown a little bit, somewhere around $194,000. And so, there's not a lot that we can do for our state defense force because of the way that we're structured. But one thing I believe that we can do for them is to make sure that when we send them out at the behest of the Georgia Emergency Management Agency, and I know Director Bryson could attest to this, when we send them out, we get a mission assignment from Director Bryson and we send them out. I think we owe it to them to send them out with the equipment that they need, the safety equipment that they need, that we bend the odds in their favor, that they go do something good for their neighbor, and they get back to their families without being injured. And, we turned a little money back recently to OPB for money that we didn't spend last year. So, from my perspective, I'll ask you to support what's in the budget, what the governor's approved in the budget, and I can assure you that if we can't give you a good return on investment on it, we're going to give it back to you. But I think that's a good number that we've got, and it enables us to make sure that we're making them safe as they go out and give unselfishly of their time and their talent to their neighbors at the greatest time of need. Sir, I hope I answered your question.
You did, and matter of fact, I totally agree with you. I'm a big fan of it.
Yes, sir.
Have a number of people in my area that belong to it, and
Yes, sir.
It's one of those type of things. I can remember when Snowmageddon came and a couple of other things. Those guys are out there for a long time, and they've always responded well. I think they responded during Hurricane Michael last year, and you're right. These guys buy their own stuff. They provide their own transportation. The least we can do is make certain they're well equipped and they're safe. So you answered my question. Thank you, sir.
Yes, sir. Thank you, sir.
Tag, let me ask you a question about the vacancies. How many vacancies do you have?
Okay, so we're running 134 vacancies right now in the Georgia DOD. I'll tell you, in terms of long-term vacancies, it's about 40, but most of those long-term vacancies are majority federal funded, and they're intentional in nature. We're certainly running, again, a lot less in the YCA. We think we're going to give back. We're running 78 vacancies specific to the YCA right now. We think we're going to give about 20 of those positions back. It allows us to right size while the construction's going on, and again, matching our capacity with projected student population. And so we're in pretty good shape, again, with respect to recruitment. It's the retention piece that generates the vacancies for us, sir.
So when your budget says that you're reducing funds for a temporary reduction in cadet graduation, are you also reducing the staffing? The cadres?
Yes, sir, absolutely. And that's kind of how we're right-sizing ourselves. It's not just taking beds offline and what it costs to get the students through. It's the cadre to student ratio is being reduced by 20 across the board.
So are these existing positions then?
Yes, sir. They're existing positions, but those positions are not filled. As I mentioned, sir, we've got 78 vacancies in the YCA. So in terms of what we deliver back to the taxpayer of Georgia, it should be negligible. In fact, we're not furloughing anybody, and we're not putting anybody out of work, sir.
And so we're not cutting existing
No, sir.
positions that are filled. Just these vacancy positions, and then you're also not cutting the services to the Youth Challenge Academies.
Yes, sir.
We're not going to expand it anytime soon. Is what we're
That's
saying.
correct. Yes,
Now,
sir.
I did want to talk to you a little bit about Fort Gordon Youth Academy with the repairs, the overall that you're making there. Do you anticipate that you're going to need to ask for either those positions back next year, or how's that going to play out when you have the facility back up and running as it was? Because that's a major operation.
Yes, sir.
Lots of barracks, runs
sir.
really well. The cadre is extremely impressive.
Yes, sir.
And the outcomes are amazing for these children.
Yes, sir. We right now, there's never been a construction schedule that's right down to the minute. But we're thinking we're going to be in the 2022 budget year. From a state budget year perspective, before we will be in a position to assess whether we need to come back and ask that question or not. So it'd be hard for me to, see into the future and tell you, but I think that's certainly within the realm of the possible. I think as facilities improve, I think perhaps our staff recruitment might improve with it, or our capacity to do that, and we might actually, students maybe a little bit more interested in attending a campus that's a little bit better. And I think based on what you all did for us with respect to the renovation dollars, really going to help that. And we look forward to having that discussion when the time comes, sir.
Good. Now, doing my math on this, you said you had 134 vacancies and that there were 40 were long-term. You had 78 vacancies just in the YCA programs. So if I'm looking at this correctly, if we take out the long-term vacancies out of the if we take out the vacancies between the long-term and the 78, then that's 118. The additional ones that we're talking about, where are those?
They were in our facilities management office at Fort Stewart, basically scattered out through the DOD, but again, they're majority federally funded positions, so we have to also manage the budget piece on that end as well, sir.
Would you mind providing me a breakdown of those positions, the positions that are vacant in each of your, say, the Youth Education Services, Military Readiness, and the Administration,
Yes, sir.
that are state funded completely?
Yes, sir.
Those that are federally funded completely, and those that are partial, and then what that partial breakdown is?
Yes, sir. Be glad to. Just to make it a little bit easier, we'll give you the exact numbers, but a lot of people don't know this, but your Georgia DOD only has about 13 100% fully funded state positions.
I thought most of it was federal.
Yeah. And 3 of them are in this room.
Good. That will be helpful in guiding our
Yes, sir.
decision making. One follow-up is that I know that y'all have been working really hard on the Milledgeville Youth Challenge Academy.
Yes, sir.
And that in and of itself has been somewhat of a challenge. But I would encourage those Georgians that are looking for an alternative with your children to look at Milledgeville as a more centralized option for you to consider. The facilities are good, and I think you're using old state grounds as well, so it's been refurbished.
Yes, sir.
And Milledgeville has historically been kind of a center point, if you will, in the state. Just keep that in mind, that the Youth Challenge Academy is an exceptional alternative for children that need something different than what high school provides. And certainly the distractions of this world are numerous and nefarious, and so this is a good opportunity. So I commend you and your staff, the cadre, the department. Keep up the good work, and thanks for protecting our state. Representative Williams wants to have the last word, evidently.
Yes, sir. Thank you.
I was liking what you were saying, Chairman, because there are a lot of people out here that really are not familiar with Youth Challenge. And one thing about Youth Challenge, it has no respect for socioeconomic background, because some very solid middle-class children have had to go to Youth Challenge to find their way. And I think that if we talk about it more, there's still a lot of help that Youth Challenge can do for kids. And I won't even call them troubled youth, but I will call them those that have kind of gotten off the path. It's a great program, and the best advertisement is you and others like you.
Thank you. All right, with that, we'll wrap up. Any more questions from members of the committee?
I was just wondering if Representative Williams was the poster child for that program.
I was, but my case was so bad I got turned down when I tried. Believe it or not, back in the day when you finished the program, the stipend was great. They gave those kids more than we make in 2 months, 3 months for coming by. And I tried to get in, I was a little old, but great program.
Yeah, and to go down there for if you haven't gone for graduation as a member of the committee, I would strongly recommend that you do so. It is, it's just thoroughly impressive to see the young men and women that come out of that. I mean, they're far more diligent and disciplined and focused on a life, with a trajectory of I'm going to make it and I'm going to succeed, and they now have the confidence to do that. I mean, it will just make you very, very proud of what this program does, and that's why it's hard to see it cut. I mean, we see this in here, and I understand your strategic cuts you're making. However, it's still hard to see that, and I wish we could do more to get more kids there. But in part, that's a good sign in a way that you don't have more kids coming in than you do. But I suspect that that's not a lack of supply as much as it is a lack of awareness. And so I think that Representative Williams is exactly right. People need to know more about it and seize that opportunity, which is why we're giving a lot more lip service than we might otherwise. But thank you for your service.
Yes, sir. Thank you very much. It's an honor to be here.
Next on our agenda is Homer Bryson. We appreciate the director being here for the Georgia Emergency Management and Homeland Security Agency. This is section 27.1 in your track sheets and pages 199 through 201 in your big budget, so that you can follow along with us as we go through the request. Also, Director Bryson has given a handout for us to look at. You'll see it here. It's in the blue, and we'll let you turn it over to you, Homer. Thank you for being here.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, committee members. It's a pleasure to be here. And before we get to the budget, I want to spend just a few minutes to talk about some recent efforts within our agency, because looking at the committee, I know many of your local communities have been directly impacted by some of these. We'll look at disasters and emergencies. The most recent, of course, being Hurricane Michael. It's impacted 69 counties in our state, and FEMA estimated damages at $190 million. And I'm going to say we, and when I'm saying we, it's the federal government and the state government combined. We have provided back to date to local communities relative to that disaster $48.2 million. And on top of that, we have provided back $242 million for debris removal at no cost to those local communities. Hurricane Dorian, back October of 2019, all the weather forecasts, it looked like it was going to be another Matthew or Irma or Michael, and we dodged a bullet there. The state took very appropriate action. The governor was very engaged with a state of emergency and evacuation orders, and I think he should be commended for that. But knock on wood, thank goodness, it turned out to be a great training exercise, and that's what it was. And then most recently, a new one for us as an agency, the water break at the Grady Hospital. You dump 100,000 gallons of water in a hospital and flood 3 floors. The impact there is pretty devastating, especially to public health services within the metro area. The governor was proactive in declaring a state of emergency, and the rationale for him doing that was it allowed us to make a request through the Emergency Mutual Aid Compact for a mobile medical facility out of the state of North Carolina. You can go over a couple of blocks and you can see that facility. It's set up in the parking lot at Grady now, and it's serving as the emergency room for Grady today. And we'll be there for many months to come. Over the past year, our agency has been very aggressive in looking at acquiring supplies and materials to aid us better respond to disasters in the future. And at almost no cost to the state, we've acquired over $3 million worth of tarps, blankets, meals ready to eat, and generators to assist with those efforts. I mentioned Matthew, Irma. If we go back to Matthew, that hurricane impacted 20 counties in our state with a over $120 million impact, and we have provided back to the local communities over $83 million. Early January, tornadoes, southwest Georgia in 2017, impacted 7 counties, almost a $20 million FEMA damage estimate. We've supplied over $14 million back to those local communities already. And then again, 2 weeks later, there just seemed to be in the center of the bullseye, they had another tornado event. This one impacted 24 counties with estimated damages of almost $33 million. And we've provided back over $18 million in those efforts. And then Irma. Since we've been doing federal disaster declarations, this is the only one that's ever actually applied to all 159 counties in our state. but it impacted every county in the state, and it has an estimated damage of $156.5 million to the state, and we have provided back $92 million related to that event. Now I'll change gears for just a moment and talk about what we've done recently regarding Homeland Security. And we can't talk about Homeland Security without talking about school safety. School safety is a priority for you, it's a priority for us, and it's a priority for the governor. Shortly after the session last year, the Georgia Department of Education stood up an Office of School Safety and Climate. We came on board with them very early, and we've actually assigned a full-time person in the office with those, and we're already reaping the benefits of that relationship and partnership. We have developed a standardized school safety plan template, and we've distributed that to every school system in the state, and we've heard nothing but positive reviews about that. We hang our hat on training and technical assistance. We provide a vast variety of training across the school systems and to the general public also. But we went to the school systems and we asked them, here's the training that we're providing. What do you need that you're not receiving? And we heard two things back from them. One was a request for de-escalation training for teachers and bus drivers, and one was for a one-day academy for school administrators and SROs. We are well on the way in developing those programs and hope to have those rolled out in the next several months. Our school safety coordinators conducted 190 classes last year, a 52% increase from the previous year. They taught 68 civilian response to active shooter courses, the most requested course that we offer. And they conducted 156 school security site assessments. Working with our partners at the Georgia Department of Public Safety and the GBI, we pooled resources and personnel, something you don't see often enough in my opinion. But we pooled resources and people, and we stood up a See Something, Send Something app for the state of Georgia to report suspicious activity. We funded a true 24/7 watch desk analyst operation within the state of Georgia when previously this had been a 40-hour-a-week operation. We're actively promoting this app to students in the school systems, and we've already got some successes from that we can share with you. We have a RAVE. It's a notification system that we use at GEMA Homeland Security. We use it for our own employees. We use it for local EMA managers, and we use it for our state partners. Well, we've also added a component to that, school superintendents. So we now can send emergency and other information to all school superintendents in this state at one time. Generally speaking about Homeland Security, we participated in a number of special events over this past year. Of course, the biggest one was the Super Bowl. We were involved with Major League Baseball playoffs, Chick-fil-A Peach Bowl, St. Patrick's Day events, both in Atlanta and in Savannah, and the Masters Tournament. And we're currently heavily involved in planning for the Final Four. We completed 22 critical infrastructure assessments and assisted the U.S. Department of Homeland Security with 5 additional assessments. Our training unit, they increased training 23% from the previous year. We provided training to over 18,000 students in over 400 separate courses. And our exercise unit provided 46 separate training exercises to over 3,500 participants this past year, and those range from hurricane to winter weather to Georgia ports to nuclear power. The new kid on the block in our agency, and kind of in state government too, is the Georgia Emergency Communications Authority. This was stood up about 2 years ago now, and I'm happy to report.
How old is the new kid?
The agency and the director are both pretty young. Surprisingly young. They have worked diligently with the local 911 systems and county governments and our partner at Revenue, and they're distributing roughly $220 million annually to counties and cities throughout the state to improve 911 operations. They were recently awarded a federal grant of almost $4 million to begin planning for Georgia's transition to next generation 911. This will lead to greater call routing accuracy within the state, and it will give us the ability for 911 centers to receive both pictures and videos. They've contracted with the Georgia Public Safety Training Center to hire a dedicated instructor to develop training for 911 operators, and they now serve as the lead state agency for emergency support functions for communications, and they've fulfilled numerous requests over the last year in that role, including Hurricane Dorian, a number of special events, including the Super Bowl, and numerous search and rescue operations. And now for what I'm actually here to talk about, the budget. If you look in amended FY 2020, as the chairman said, it's on page 13, beginning at 27.5. Point 1 is the elimination of funds for 3 school safety coordinators for a total of $274,920. This was added to the budget last year in anticipation of SB 15 passing. It did not, and so that eliminated the need for those positions. And after the bill did not pass and go into effect, we never filled those positions. And then 27.5.2, we're replacing state funds with other revenue, or other funds. It's revenue, and that again is for the Emergency Communications Authority. Our total net adjustments in the amended budget is $401,760. Turning over to fiscal year 2021, again, this is on page 13, section 27.5. Point 1, point 2, point 3, those are the statewide changes that I'm sure you're very familiar with at this point, and I'll be glad to answer any questions on those if you have any. And beginning at point 4, again, those same 3 school safety coordinators that were previously mentioned, carrying that fund difference over, replacing state funds with other funds revenue, again, at the Georgia Emergency Communications Authority, and eliminate one-time funds for emergency shelter repairs. And then we're transitioning from state funds to federal funds to conduct a Homeland Security threat assessment. And that's a federal requirement for us to receive Homeland Security grant funding. And so our total net adjustment is $550,843. And Mr. Chairman, that concludes my presentation. Be glad to take any questions.
Thank you, Director Bryson. Representative Williams.
Thank you. Good to see you, my neighbor to the south.
Always a pleasure.
Question about, and it will lead to a question, a follow-up. Tell me about the elimination of funds for the 3 school safety coordinators, the SB 15.
As I said, that this was a bill that was vetoed by the governor, and those positions were added into that. And one of the downsides or concerns with that bill related to the administrative burden that the bill was going to create, so that went away. Internally within the agency, I've never been one to wait on looking at how we can provide better service to the citizens of this state. And as the representative says, I'm a rural person, so I understand the rural communities. And we had already moved 2 people from behind desk in my agency and assigned them into the field for the Homeland Security, and a part of that is school safety. So we already put 2 additional people out there. We also looked at 2 other positions within the agency that were coming vacant. We realigned those duties, took them out from behind desk, assigned one to training primarily for schools in South Georgia, and we're in the process now. Hope to hire someone for that northern position probably sometime later this year.
Okay, all right, thank you. That answers my question.
Thank you. A few questions concerning the school safety is the see something, send something, or see something, do something app that you talked about. Tell me, when you said that that you're seeing success in use of the app, could you be more specific in terms of the promotion of the app so that it's out there and available and people are, and then what is the use? What kind of return on that investment are we seeing?
We're actually, we've been promoting this in schools. We've had a poster printed, and some other promotional materials that we're very aggressively promoting this in the school systems. That's really our primary focus now. We've done some outreach to the statewide, but we haven't done as much with that. My numbers are a little bit dated with this, but I can tell you several months ago, and looking at the data, there had already been over 1,600 calls in to see something, send something. Mm-hmm. Out of those 1,600 calls, again, this is a little dated information, but if memory is correct, 247 of those calls related directly to school threats, and there were a number of arrests that were made off of those calls.
Just let us know exactly what the more modern numbers are instead of the dated numbers. It'd be helpful to know what the current numbers are.
Be glad to update that for you.
Sometimes the initial use and rollout of something can have a spike, and then you can see it taper off, or you may see it go up. That would be helpful to know. Secondarily, the school system in Henry County has implemented a school safety program whereby the teachers, and it's coordinated with the sheriff's department and local law enforcement and emergency response simply by an app on their phone as well. That has been, I think, provided through an outside vendor that allows them to immediately communicate instantaneously once they see something that requires law enforcement response. In addition, it also allows for every other administrator and faculty member to know that there is something going on, so that there's not the need to announce by intercom, but quietly through that system. So that's an impressive system that they've used. The grant money that we had administered out last session, they've already applied that money for that purpose. To what extent that those kinds of systems are being utilized throughout the state, if you're aware at all?
There's a number of those different systems in the state, and I'm familiar with several different school systems that have different versions of that and different levels of that in effect. And I think there's a lot of interest in that, and a lot of school systems are looking at that. I think that was one of the things that was smart on the governor's part with the budget last year, and not directing how those school safety funds, but by giving the school systems themselves the latitude to put that money where they most needed it. I think that was wise, and the reality is this: school safety is really, if it's going to work, it has to be done at the local levels and the cooperation between the local governments. Most school shootings that occur last less than 4 minutes. And so it really is something that has to be driven and worked on at the local level, and I think the state's role with that is with technical assistance and with training, and I think that's the model that works best for us.
Also, when we convened in 2000 and I guess it was 2018, after Hurricane Michael, the General Assembly came back into session to pass a $69 million relief package for Southwest Georgia in particular. Of that, there was, I noticed in your numbers here relating to Hurricane Michael, that we only expended so much as $48.2 million in monies. And I want to know if you could speak to the apportionment of at least the emergency funds that were allocated as a part of that, and how that's going to move forward, because it seems very delayed in terms of the overall response to assistance to Southwest Georgia.
I'd be glad to. Great question. The funding that you're referring to that was allocated by the state, that's a different pot of funds that went to that disaster outside of the numbers that I have shared with you here today. The numbers that I've shared with you here today are FEMA eligible disaster cost reimbursements. Okay. And yes, I agree with you that it takes too long with these monies to get them back into the local communities. I think of it as a three-legged stool. When you have the federal dollars involved, you have local governments and reporting responsibilities that they're liable for. Then you have the state leg and the pieces that we do there. And the governor's been very gracious to us, and we have added positions into our work unit that processes that for us to get to FEMA. All those positions are 100% federally funded. So we've really shortened any delays at the state level and local communities receiving that money. But then the third leg is the federal government. And we have very little control and very little input in how long it takes to process through the federal system.
As part of that relief, I noticed in your slide on disasters and emergencies for 2019 that you'd indicated that you had acquired, it looks like you're trying to rebuild up your surplus or your reserves for tarps, blankets, waters, MREs, and generators. Just as a comment, I know that there were several members of this General Assembly, in particular the House, that trailered generators down to Southwest Georgia to help with emergency operations, maintaining health facilities and other necessary facilities during the time. I'm not going to name the names of those individuals who did that, but that just goes to show in my book that leadership in this House goes beyond sitting in these meetings and listening to presentations. It goes into the action that you perform in your districts. And I know members, and one member is going to present a bill that lent a helping hand in that regard. And so I just wanted to echo that sentiment because I see you're restocking generators, and for good reason, because I know that a lot were used during that episode.
And this really is just a small piece of that puzzle. I honestly didn't get into a lot of that related to hazard mitigation grant funds that are available for our local communities, and they apply for those grants, and we're processing through theirs now, and it's literally several hundred generators that we're processing through to go to our local communities to address those issues that you're talking about.
Good. You also had mentioned here under Hurricane Dorian that it turned out to be a good exercise. My question to you, though, Director, is that I want to know how the radio systems worked during the response build-up and the ability to communicate across different radio frequencies and different radio channels throughout the coastal region of the state of Georgia. That has been a challenge in the past. It is a challenge that our state faces in terms of emergency coordination. And I know that part of the contemplation for the Georgia Emergency Communication Act was to help address that and provide some centralized organization in that regard. Could you speak to that, please?
Yes, sir, and you're correct. It is an issue, and it's been an issue. I've been in law enforcement in this state for almost 40 years now, and it's been an issue my entire career. And when you start talking about statewide interoperability, it becomes a hugely expensive endeavor depending on how it's rolled out and how it's done. I think with the changes that are occurring in technology now, I think there's opportunities we've never had before. And as we ensure that we have the funding in place through Michael's shop, that's one of the things that's on our radar that we're looking at. Southern Link has come out with a product now that we think has some potential there to help bridge the gap with that. I don't think it's the end all, but I think it's a device that could help bridge that gap somewhat, but it is definitely something that we have on our radar, and we're concerned about it just as you are.
Okay, thank you. I see no other questions from members of the committee. I appreciate the presentation that you made to us today. I did have one more question, though. In 2020, last year, we had provided $100,000 in repairs and renovations to emergency shelters. Have those repairs been made? What's the status of those?
Yes, sir. It was one shelter in Southwest Georgia, and that process is underway. And I don't want to speak without a term, but I think we have forwarded the majority of those funds to that local community. We may have a small piece held back just to ensure completion of the project, but the bulk of the funds have been provided to the local community.
Director Bryson, thank you for your service. Thank you to your men and women that serve with you. And thank you for the presentation today. We're glad you're here, and thank you for being prepared with your numbers.
Thank you.
All right, we've got a couple more to do today, just a couple. Next on our list is our Georgia State Board of the Criminal Justice Coordinating Council and Accountability Courts. Jay Neal will be presenting. This is in section 30.5. It goes from there to page 230 and 231 of the big budget, if you have that with you. The section 30.5 is where we'll be delving into this. Director Neal, thank you for being here today with your staff. And thank you also to the judges that are here today. Thank you so much for being here today. We appreciate you all attending on behalf of the State Accountability Courts. With that, I'll turn it over to Director Neal.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee. It's always a joy to come and share with my friends from the House after spending time in service with many of you. We're here today to support the governor's recommendations for our budget. And when the governor shared with us last fall that he wanted to see us utilizing technology and innovation to eliminate duplication and create efficiencies within our agencies, we began to think back over what we've been doing at CJCC for the last number of years. And quite frankly, we have made some significant progress over the last 3 or 4 years at CJCC in doing that. And before we get into to the budget, I would like to have our division director from our administration division to come and share with you a little bit of that. Nathan Branscombe oversees our HR and IT budget and finance programs, and he's going to come and share briefly some of the things that we've done over the last few years to use technology and innovation to create efficiencies.
Thank you, and good afternoon, Mr. Chairman and committee members. So CJCC works very hard to support the victims and the criminal justice agencies in the state of Georgia. And Director Neal asked me to very briefly, I promise briefly, share our efforts to improve efficiency with which we provide these services. So we've been using technology and innovation with a goal of maximizing the money we put out into our communities to actually provide services rather than hold it back and create administrative burden. And this kind of goes back to 2014 when CJCC was faced with a dramatically expanding programmatic budget as both federal funding and state funding for our programs and criminal justice reform occurred. And we found that we were limited by 15 to 20-year-old software systems, which I know a lot of state agencies face. Insufficient staffing, immature agency policies and procedures, and a number of things holding us back. And as people are often familiar with, it's often hard to identify administrative funds to come along with additional programmatic funds. So our goal was to find ways to streamline our operations and keep providing services and improve services without risking the programmatic funding or having worsening services. So we undertook an initiative that's run out over the last 5 years, and in that time period, we fully implemented a new victims claim processing system, accompanied by a portal that allows victims and our partner agencies to file and access all of their claims online. We have implemented a unified financial workflow system that allows us to bring all of our workflows together and flow more efficiently through the state financial process, and with that, we've eliminated 90% of the duplicative operations between CJCC and GBI and eliminated double data entry, therefore reducing errors. We have implemented new and improved case management systems and reporting systems for our family violence partners in the state, and we completed workflow and process analyses on all of our major agency programs, and we've been able to use those reports to improve the workflow, the processes, and to improve and develop systems to streamline those efforts. So from the numbers, as the chairman and we spoke earlier, CJCC is an agency all about numbers and all about payments and all about getting dollars out to serve our victims and our criminal justice agencies. In 2014, CJCC, with a staff of 4, issued 16,846 payments totaling $53 million. In FY 2019, a processing staff of 3 issued 45,858 payments totaling $154 million. In our victims compensation division, in 2014, a comp claim typically took in excess of 30 days to fully investigate and as much as 4 weeks after the approval to pay that claim. At the same time, Staff were frequently required to work large amounts of overtime to meet our needs and our victims' needs, and we ended up typically with payments around $18 million per year in that period. In 2019, the average processing time for a claim due to our new systems and processes was 15 days, with the typical payment going out within 7 to 10. And at the same time, we put $21 million and more than 3 times the number of payments out into the state, while staff worked absolutely no mandatory overtime.
Let me ask you about the claims.
Yes.
And the compensation. When we use victims' compensation, you've given us a breakdown of forensic interview claims and the medical examination claims.
Yes, sir.
There on page 2, slide 2, $4.1 million in forensic medical examination claims. I know that Representative Holcomb, I know the Speaker, I know that some of the senators, and other members of the House have certainly been very attentive to and concerned about the ability for medical forensic evidence to be turned around, identified, tested, and then the data turned around to check with codex and other and returned back to law enforcement for prosecutorial purposes. What significance and what impact has this $4.1 million had in that context, if to the extent you can speak about it?
So and I'll defer if I don't touch all of the points, but I think the single largest impact of that $4.1 million is that we are guaranteeing that no forensic medical exam will go unpaid for in the state, and that no victim will ever be charged for their forensic medical exam. So we are providing a guarantee for hospitals that if funds aren't available through insurance or another source, we will be present to pay that exam without fail, that they can do it, assured they'll receive payment, and that the victim will not have to be billed or see the cost for that.
Now, sometimes overlap in agencies is not a good thing and can be wasteful and duplicative. What I just heard you tell me is that you're going to make sure the claim is paid expediently and for those in need.
Yes.
The question I have, and you may not be able to respond to it, is to what extent are the results of those tests also expeditedly returned so that the victim's non-financial issues are resolved, but their psychological, and the law enforcement response to administer justice in those scenarios is likewise tracked and responded to in a timely fashion. Payment's one thing, but justice is an entirely different thing.
I'm going to yield to Director Neal on that.
You want to?
So Mr. Chairman, our sexual assault and human trafficking unit works very closely with all of our sexual assault centers and victim advocates, whether in district attorney's offices or in those centers. Those victim advocates work hard to make sure that any of those victims around the state receive opportunities to, if there's victim compensation, if they're eligible for victims compensation, they'll assist them in applying for the victims compensation fund. If there's a need for counseling, they assist them through the counseling. We also work very closely through the Sexual Assault Kit Initiative to make sure that, for example, we've got an initiative here in the metro area working very closely with the CAB in Cobb County, where we've seen some pretty significant results on some of those cold case kits that have been tested over the last few years. We've seen some really good things happening there. Through that grant, there's also personnel at the Prosecuting Attorneys Council to help prosecutors around the state to help provide training or support in helping them prosecute those cases. So it's a real coordinated effort among not just our agency, but our nonprofit partners around the state, the state agencies and prosecutors, and it's a pretty complex network that collaborates together in those areas.
Representative Holcomb, did you want to follow up anything? No. Okay. Chairman Werkheiser, let's see, let me get you turned on here.
Thank you, Chairman. And I think what the Chairman was getting at, because I think we've kind of asked for this over a while, and I know the process can be long, but we still would like to quantify what are the results as results of the rape kits because we keep hearing a lot of efforts have been made. We're working with folks. Is there any way to get any kind of data to say X amount of prosecutions have been made or arrests?
We can put something together for the committee. Just anecdotally, I can tell you a couple of things that we've talked about in our office just over the last couple of weeks. One of the most notorious serial killers, 5 victims in the state of Georgia. 4 have been identified. We actually had a couple of our employees in the coroner's office in Chatham County working with folks in Chatham County, the district attorney down there, and going through records to try to help identify one of the victims, and we were able to make that identification down there. Recently, the Saki initiative in Cobb County identified a serial rapist from more than 10 years ago that had committed 2 rapes in Cobb County and a rape in Douglas County. Took the DNA that came through that Saki initiative, was able to, the rapist did not have DNA in CODIS, so we weren't able to match up directly with the DNA in CODIS, but we brought in a genetic expert that was able, through an ancestry site, to find a family member. And they were able to determine through that this was someone that was 4 times removed, so they went through that family tree of the individual they identified, found those individuals 4 times removed, and then began to look to see out of that group who was in Cobb County and who was in Douglas County during those times. Investigators were sent to Arkansas and did a swab, a DNA swab, and that evening that rapist actually took his own life. But that's a couple of anecdotal cases that I've heard our staff talking about just in the last couple of weeks. But we can put together some information to get that to you.
All right, thanks. 'Cause that's what we want to hear.
Okay.
And if you're good, sir, to finish up very quickly, so in addition to the victim's assistance, or the victim's claims processing, we have managed through the same systems and improvements to reduce the processing times for grant payments by half, while we've also, as you'll see in our documentation, crossed over 1,000 sub-grantee awards every year in the state, which is just around double where we were a few years ago. And ultimately, we've succeeded in tackling a lot of our biggest kind of systemic challenges to modernizing our workflow and getting money out into the state to do its job. But we recognize we still have work to do, and this year are continuing to pursue initiatives to continue to improve our processes to try to improve our customer experience and our partner experience as they engage with our services, and to eliminate the kind of one-time errors that cause payment delays and leave people unfunded for temporary periods. And so we're looking at both improved reporting and automation systems, including robotic processing applications, to try and essentially work down our opportunity for human error and human slowdowns in the workflow system. So with all these kind of numbers and successes in mind, I'm really proud to be able to say that in 2019, for every one state administrative dollar we invest in CJCC staff and operations, we put $124 to work in the state. And for every one full-time agency employee at CJCC, we put $1.4 million into local agencies and direct service provision. So, thank you. I'm happy to take any questions or hand it back to Director Neal.
To follow up with your question about results, our Saki initiative, which is the initiative in Cobb County and DeKalb County, has been in existence for a year, and just with this one initiative, we have seen 23 cases indicted. 4 rapists have been convicted, and 3 of those 4 rapists were serial rapists. That's just in Cobb and DeKalb County within the last year. But we'll get additional numbers for you as well, and get those to you as quickly as we can. We too are results driven. We certainly appreciate your interest in that. I'm not going to go over the handout that I gave you. I think this is pretty self-explanatory. If you have any questions about that, feel free to ask the questions, and I'd be glad to answer those. if you'd like for me to begin talking about the budget, I know that's really why we're here. We, in the amended budget, the recommended change to reduce funds by eliminating one vacant position and transferring duties to other filled positions. We had just had an individual that had resigned about the time we got the instructions to begin looking for the 4% and 6% reductions. We were able to realign some responsibilities within the agency and eliminate that position, and we're going to be able to do that without having an impact on the operations of our agency. Reduced funds for publication and training, $14,500. We had been doing our annual report, which we distribute to you all. We had been contracting with a third party to do those annual reports, and we're doing those in-house now. We're doing some of the training that some of the expenses for training that we've done in the past, we've been able to reduce because of using technology to provide some of that training. Reduced funds through attrition and hiring delays, $5,000. Reduced funds for juvenile justice incentive grants to local governments, $410,350. And by the way, when we began looking at these reductions, we have a state administrative budget of $1.3 million roughly. We have about $54 million in state dollars that we grant out to our partner agencies. So when we began looking at these cuts, there was no possible way to reach the cuts without impacting our partner agencies. We've had a couple of, and by the way, the juvenile justice incentive grants, as you know, are pretty significant in reducing the number of out-of-home placements for juveniles. We have, I believe it's 37 counties now that participate with our juvenile justice incentive grants. We've had a couple of counties that have had some issues this year in spending their grants. Fulton County had a procurement issue. They're still finalizing a contract, and they're going to be lapsing a significant amount of their grant. There's a couple of others that are doing so as well. We're going to be able to cover that $410,000 with lapsed funds. Typically, what we do in the juvenile justice incentive grant program, we track them quarterly on their spending to make sure that they're spending down those grants. And we do mid-year adjustments for those that are not spending down their grants, and we'll do a supplement grant opportunity for the counties that may have more youth coming in than they anticipated, or for some reason they're spending more than they originally thought, and that lapse money will be distributed. This year we're holding that lapse money, and that we'll be able to recognize those savings by holding that lapse money. The reduced funds for technical assistance to courts provided by the Department of Behavioral Health and Developmental Disabilities as a result of implementing service guidelines is a $300,000 reduction. The Council of Accountability Court Judges is here, and I will allow them to speak a little bit more about that cut. And then reducing the funds for supplemental state grant awards to local accountability courts. And again, with the accountability courts, the grants are awarded at the beginning of the year. The funding committee for the Council of Accountability Court Judges award those grants. And then there's a supplemental grant mid-year with accountability courts as well. And we're reducing those funds for that supplemental grant of $1.3 million. And then reduce funds to meet anticipated expenditures of $50,000. And we will be able to meet that as well. Would you like for me to speak about the main budget?
Yes, please.
So for the let me see if I can find the tracking sheet here.
While you're doing that,
Yes.
while you're I noticed that there's similarities in the cuts. You did not mention, and I was just going to let you cover it in your full budget, but there's a $300,000 cut to technical assistance to courts being provided to the Department of Behavioral Health. And so could you just speak to that. It's 300,000 in both
Yep.
budgets, so.
That's one that's through the CACJ, and if it's okay, I'd like for them to speak toward that, if that would be all right.
That'll be fine.
Okay.
And then the other thing that I was noticing here is that you have in terms of there's an increase in funds of $1,000 to pay full-time employees of $40,000 or less, and I noticed $364. So that must be a fractional salary that's between a federal subsidized salary and state. Is that correct?
So one of the interesting things about the CJCC is we have such a strong mix of federal funds through our agency, and Crime Victims Compensation Program, for example, is completely covered through the Crime Victims Compensation Fund. We have a number of employees in that division that earn less than $40,000 a year. That $1,000 would come out of the Crime Victims Compensation Fund. We only have 2 employees that receive any state funds that earn less than $40,000 a year. One of them receives 10% state funds. Mm-hmm. The other one receives 12.5% of their salary through state funds. So that will allow us to provide that $1,000 for both of those employees.
Director Neal, just that was what Representative Williams was going to ask you about, but just to save time, because the sizable cuts that are being made in this budget are to the accountability courts and their technical assistance with the Department of Behavioral Health.
Yes.
So I think what I would just commend to the committee is that the cuts that the director has just gone through in terms of the amended are the same in the fiscal year 21 budget, obviously of higher amounts because it's a full year cut. So if it's all right, Director, I'd like to hear from the accountability courts and on these major changes in our budgetary process. And I think that's where you were going anyway. But I just wanted to hurry us along given our time.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Director. I appreciate it. So as they come up, Kathy Gosselin, Judge Gosselin, and Judge Weaver, I thank you for being here. Some other judges here that I cannot remember your names, and I apologize, that are accountability court judges in our state. As a Judge Goss, who was recently passed and had moved from the Albany area to our Court of Appeals, was a longtime hero and champion of behavioral health and accountability courts. And I had the pleasure of working with Judge Gosselin and Judge Goss my first year here when Chairman Wendell Willard assigned a bill to me as a freshman and said, "Here, you work on this." And it dealt with an administrative process within our court system. I came to know Judge Goss and Judge Gosselin through that process. It is a very fond memory. It does bring back some tears in my eyes as I think about the passing of Judge Goss, and I think about the number of people that we have lost as a result of suicide across this state, and how that has not gone down. But the pressures of the jobs that many people do, especially in public service, cannot be understated. And so there are those that take on more of the burden than others, and they carry it with them, and I'm sure that it affects them in ways that I will not begin to understand. But I do appreciate and commend them for their service. And Judge Goss was one of those people that I came to know that I think carried more of the burden of the people that came before him, probably absorbed a lot of their mental stresses and family stresses than many do. And when you're an accountability court judge, I assume that that's almost a prerequisite for the job. If you're going to do it and do it well, you're going to take on that burden mentally, emotionally. So I appreciate what you do, because you have to be hard. You have to be tough and difficult, and you have to press people to make fairly seismic changes in their lives and the families to go along with it. So I say that only just to remember Judge Goss as Judge Gosselin steps forward, but I also appreciate your service. And so with that, I'll let you talk about the cuts and how they're going to affect the courts across this state.
Thank you, Chairman Welch, and I appreciate those words, and I know Judge Goss would too. Appreciate those. We both had good memories of that first encounter in determining incompetency to stand trial bill that we worked on. I'm going to just start briefly by telling you who else is here. Judge Brenda Weaver is here, who's last year's chair of the Council of Accountability Court Judges. I'm fortunate to be able to be the chair this year. Judge Curry Mingledorf from the Piedmont Circuit is here, and Judge Eddie Barker from Douglas State Court is here, and both active members of our Council of Accountability Court Judges. Most of the presentation you're going to hear is from our super competent Executive Director, Taylor Jones, who has all the numbers at her fingers. I'm going to be wrapping up with a couple comments, but I do want to say that the cuts that were in this budget, although we completely understand in a tight year that everybody has to make cuts and everybody has to tighten their belt, there would be devastating if they are at the level that they are in this budget. So she's going to give you some more details about that, and we're both able to ask her questions.
What level would not be devastating?
The 4% could be absorbed.
Okay.
Okay. I'm going to let Ms. Jones talk.
Well, good afternoon. Thank you, Judge Gosselin. I'm going to speak a little bit, obviously, about the cuts while I'm up here, but also about some of the good work that our courts are doing. And I know we handed out some materials prior
Cuts first, please.
I'm sorry?
Let's talk about the cuts first, please.
Okay. The reductions to the amended budget, as already stated, is $1,340,417 to the supplemental state grant awards and $300,000 for technical assistance provided to the courts by DBHCD, and those are in the amended budget. In the reductions to the 2021 budget, there's also the $300,000 cut to the technical assistance provided to the courts by DBHCD, an additional $45,000 reduction to the DCS day reporting center line item, and then $2,119,440 to the state grant awards for accountability courts. The recommended reduction amount for fiscal year 21 is approximately 8%. Of the total budget for accountability courts, and it's a 5.3% reduction to the amended amount for 2020.
5.3?
Yes, sir.
Now, are there matching funds that go along with any of these, especially with DBHCD funds? Are there matching funds that come in to those? No. So this is purely state money, no federal dollars.
To DBHCD, yes.
Okay. And so in addition to the $10 million core cuts that we're seeing with DBHDD in this budget, these are the ancillary cuts that are also on the outside that you don't see unless you look into these other subject areas, which I think is true for a couple of the other areas of public safety and other branches of government. Tell me about the technical assistance that DBHDD is providing to the courts and how that impacts what you do.
Sure. The funding for this effort is primarily in the form of 3 liaison positions that work with our courts and the community service boards that receive funding directly from DBHCD to support the treatment services provided to accountability courts. They're helping to provide technical assistance in the area of new service guidelines to ensure that the treatment that is actually occurring in the CSBs for accountability courts is consistent across the state and at the level of dosage that we need for our accountability court participants. So it's 3 positions that are helping to liaison between the courts and DBHCD and that CSB.
You said dosage.
Yes, sir.
Are you talking about administering a medication?
The number of treatment hours that are actually provided to the courts. So based off of the level of need that a participant comes in to the court on, their dosage is going to vary. So we want to make sure that there's enough dosage happening so we can have those good participant outcomes.
And so these are psychiatrists or psychologists that are actually providing counseling hours that we're talking about?
Yes, sir.
Okay.
Not the DBHCD positions.
No.
But they're helping facilitate that or ensuring that they're getting the requisite amount?
Correct.
These facilitators?
Correct, yes.
How would this be done without the facilitators? How can this be accomplished?
It would primarily fall back to the local courts to try and monitor. It'd be a difficult thing for them to do, being that they don't work for DBHCD or they don't work for the CSB. It'd be another thing that they try and monitor as part of their treatment contracts.
Excuse me, what degrees is the accountability court judge expected to have?
I'll defer to Judge Gosselin on that question.
Okay. The facilitator positions, I assume that these folks are trained and knowledgeable in in making sure that the right dosage, the right protocols are administered relative to people with mental disabilities. Is that what we're
That's
referring
correct.
to? And so these individuals are in need of some psychological treatment to help them overcome either an addiction or maybe some violent reactions, some post-traumatic stress disorders. Ma'am?
And severe and persistent mental illness.
Can you step up and just...
Sure. Severe and persistent mental illness for mental health courts as well.
So again, the question would be, how do you, so it's just going to fall back to the judge and his or her staff to try to monitor this?
That's correct.
Are there tools that are made available through CJCC that would help with monitoring some maybe programs? Technology is not the cure to everything, but it seems to be a popular placebo. My question, so is there something else that can be done, some kind of technology that can be used to screen this, to reduce it to, I don't know, one statewide facility that's helping to monitor these things, or is it, I'm trying to figure if there's a solution to the need for facilitators?
The facilitators work mostly in areas that don't have as good a working relationship with their CSB. In some areas of the state, we do have a good working relationship with our CSB. So it really depends on where you are and what services are offered by your community service board.
How many facilitators then, or how many judges are assigned to a facilitator? And is there a way to
Well, there are only 3 facilitators already, so they cover the whole state.
Well, you said there's the local staff, in some jurisdictions, local staffs are able to cover this, and they have a good working relationship, so
Yes.
I'm understanding that to mean you wouldn't need a facilitator for
Right.
some of those circuits.
I don't know if we know the numbers right now, where it's more needed, where there isn't the strong relationship with the
I think that would be
CSB.
helpful to know.
We can find out, probably.
And it may have already been presumed in the 3 that you gave us last year, I think it was.
Right.
So, okay, let's speak to the amount of cuts to the actual grants. Taylor, could you explain the grant funding and what that means, and then what is the resulting effect of the cuts?
Absolutely. Well, the grant funding process is a competitive one. So we have an annual grant that each court that's certified through the Council of Accountability Court Judges is able to apply for state funds. It's a reimbursement grant. So the grants are going to be initially awarded to the counties. The counties are going to initially spend the funds for things like program personnel, program coordinators, case managers. Funding is also going to go towards evidence-based treatment services for participants, drug testing, surveillance visits that is going to be performed by local law enforcement for home and work visits to ensure that participants are complying with the program rules and policies. So the funding is initially spent by the local law enforcement or local courts to then be reimbursed by the state for those program activities.
Now these protocols and this testing, and these are protocols that are adopted pursuant to our criminal justice reform legislation, but aren't these protocols that are put forward by the council?
Yes.
And so these are standards that are used throughout the state, across the board, to effectuate the purpose and intent of criminal justice reform, so that individuals are getting the treatment, the proper oversight, and the rigor through the system, so that it's actually effective. And what is the effective rate right now for your accountability courts? I know it varies on the court, but what are we seeing in terms of lack of recidivism rates relevant to those courts?
Well, we know that any amount of participation in an accountability court is going to reduce recidivism. Within your packets, we have a recidivism chart that speaks to the recidivism rates for each accountability court type. It's going to be in this nice, pretty handout here. But we know that participants that graduate from an accountability court are going to do far better than those that don't. But we also know...
Well, I know far better is, it's...
For example, a drug court participant that graduated from an accountability court only recidivated at the rate of 27%. One that was terminated
What was that?
Recidivated at the rate of 27%.
27%.
For felony drug court.
So 73% success rate.
Yes, for those that graduate.
And alternatively, would they be in jail?
Yes, most likely.
Prison, jail. Yeah. Mike, you have a question?
I don't, 73% success rate. I don't know of any other percentage that high in any other program we're working with in the state. If there's another, I'd like to know about it, but that's...
Graduation rates are what, at 85%?
And that's tremendous work.
Okay, sorry, just I want to put real numbers. I don't want qualifiers, I want quantifiers.
Okay. We also know that our retention rate has increased this past year to 95%, and retention rate is going to be where a person is obviously retained in the program. It takes approximately 18 to 24 months to complete an accountability court program. So the more people that we can retain, the more people we're going to get to graduation to get to that completion rate that we just spoke about, or that small recidivism rate, I should say. Accountability courts in our outcomes, the 95% retention rate has increased actually from last year from 84%. So we're seeing more people that are staying in the programs. Our courts are doing wonderful things with evidence-based treatment to keep the participants engaged, to get them to that graduation
But the
mark.
proof is in the pudding, because I'm going to graduations all across, in my area in Henry County. I know that Mike was telling me about the graduations that he attends and actually speaks at as a guest speaker. So this is, you're talking about, and those rooms are packed. They're packed both with the people that are going through the system, as well as their families and friends that are there. And so, it seems like to me that's having that's having the effect of communicating to the public that these courts work and the outcomes are positive, which incentivizes someone that unfortunately finds themselves in the accountability court and subject to the jurisdiction of the accountability court. There's proof in saying, okay, if you stick with this, your likelihood of having your life back, whether that be taken back from the opioids that took your life away, or the alcohol, or whatever it is that took your life away from you, your former life, you can get that back if you stick with this program. Is that fair to say?
Yes. Some other interesting outcomes that we have from our FY19 data is that we know that through our courts collected and reported data that 72 drug-free babies were born to female accountability courts last year, and that we had 90 families reunified through our family treatment courts. These are significant numbers.
And a drug-free baby is going to reduce the cost to society in terms of medical treatment and ongoing medical care.
Correct, yes. We understand from an uncomplicated delivery of $3,500 to a complicated delivery of close to $63,000 based on our research and
Well, when
analysis.
I asked for numbers, you seem to have them, Taylor.
I came with lots of numbers today.
Mm-hmm. We're not talking about certifications of courts, are we?
No, not today, sir, no.
I think we've got all the certified and up and running across the entire state, is that right?
We do. We have 163 courts, and we grew from 72.
And that took us about 5 years to get there?
A little closer to 8, but we grew significantly from 72 to 163 in 8 years.
Okay. I'm sorry to derail you. I just want to make sure we're getting some of that information out.
No, I'm happy that you asked those questions, Chairman. Some other things I'd like to share is that in a recent analysis of our data is that for every $1 invested in an accountability court here in Georgia, that there's $7.74 saved. We also know that last year in fiscal year 19, we served 12,670 participants compared to the 10,656 that we served in fiscal year 18.
But these individuals that would they otherwise find themselves in state prisons or they be in local jails for a period of time, depending on these are not high-level crimes. These are low-level crimes that are dealing based in addiction-driven, but and not all of them, because the very courts different. There's different courts. So, but the question is really getting back to, are there costs that are offset, local costs to the local jails, sheriffs, and counties that are saved by going through the accountability court system that would otherwise be a burden on the local taxpayers for each county in the state?
We would absolutely say yes. There's definitely some local savings. Did you want to speak to that, Judge?
There's savings on both ends. The DUI courts, for instance, that Judge Barker presides over, that obviously is a savings for a local jail. Any misdemeanor courts that are involved in the accountability courts would save local jails. A lot of us have folks that would end up with shorter sentences. But then we have drug courts and some mental health courts that have people that would end up in prison. And so we have a statistic about how much it costs to be in prison for a year of about $18,000 a year versus an accountability court, an average cost is about $3,600.
Could you extrapolate that out, Taylor, for the number of people that have come through the accountability courts, just looking back a year, that would have been DUI or mental health, and help us to understand and assign, then we multiply that out, because we know how many people came in, we can assign a value that way, and maybe you have those numbers to understand that 18,000 times X number of people throughout the state of Georgia, and that cost would have been however much to taxpayers. And that way we can compare that, relatively speaking, to the amount of cuts that are being asked.
We could do that math.
Okay.
And get it to you, yes. Because I think we have all the figures, so.
We do.
Okay.
We have those figures, and we just need a little time to perform that analysis, but we can get that to you quickly.
I think that's important to see relative to these cuts, what that looks like. And it also goes to what I'm getting at is an unfunded mandate that we're pushing back. As you cut these things, you actually push this back onto the local governments, counties in particulars, that I'm concerned about. But Representative Williams has a question.
Thank you. Thank both of you. Judge, what you said when you initially got up in direct response to a question from the chairman, that the full 10% or so cuts would be devastating. And as I look at this, I have a serious problem, and somewhere the math got messed up. We've seriously cut behavioral health dollars. Now we're cutting accountability court dollars. But the costs won't go away, it'll just change who pays.
Yes.
Because somebody's gonna pay for this. Folk are not going, well, I can't do this now because, courts run out of money, so I better wait until the money comes back. It's not the real world. Accountability courts, according to you all, according to the math, working. I'll be very honest with you. I'm a country boy, and I like these slicks and all, but I'm really just here to talk about the effects of these cuts. We know the good work you do. I really want to know, what are you going to do when you hadn't got this money, and what happens to, we have had a huge increase in meth and other nonviolent problems that these courts have addressed effectively, especially the Veterans Treatment Court. It just bothers me that we go to tears when we talk about our veterans, and then we find them under the bridge and leave them under there.
Yeah.
See, but what I want to know is, what are you going to do to make up for this gap? What's going to happen, and where are they going, except back to jail?
Well, jail will take up some of the cost.
Oh, yes, I can see.
But there's some things that can't be made up. And I will just say that it's my belief that this level of cuts will affect rural programs and newer programs more than it will other programs. The rural programs don't have the county support that the metro courts do have, and they won't be able to make it up because their counties don't have that kind of money. The newer courts that haven't built up the kind of census or the kind of county support that they need will also struggle and probably not be able to survive. We've also had 11 courts that want to come on as of July 1st, and whether we'll be able to fund 11 new courts will be a question.
One follow-up and I'm finished. For us to talk about, we have a great committee to find solutions to problems in rural Georgia. It's an oxymoron. To have a committee to find solutions and to gut programs that's working. I mean, and poor counties will suffer disproportionately, like you've said.
Yes.
But believe me, meth, other drugs, mental problems, just as severe to 10 people in a little county as it might be to 1,000 in a big county. The effect on these little counties are devastating, and it's unconscionable to go back to the dark years. I don't care what the excuses are, but it's unconscionable.
Thank you.
Sorry, I'm buried under paper over here. I actually have a question for the CJCC, if y'all wouldn't mind. Director Neal. And my question is this. Out of your budget, in your amended budget, there was a 4% reduction that was requested by the governor, and currently your grants to the Council of Accountability Court judges constitute 83% of that. In the big budget, there was a 6% decrease that was requested by the governor, and 88% of that is being shouldered by the Council of Accountability Court judges. And that's a grant. That's not any positions. You know, we've seen 127 child welfare workers gone from DFACs. We've seen divisions and departments in the state really have to trim down. And I don't see any trimming from CJCC. I see them cutting the money that they're giving to other people, but I don't see any, you know, efficiencies. I don't see, and your work is to be commended, and y'all do great work, but I don't see any of that. I don't see any of that sharing of the burden. Can you speak to that?
I can. We have 163 courts that we provide the services for. We have last year over 1,000 sub-grants that we awarded. We awarded over $135 million in grants last year. Each of those grants require the processing, the management. There is a considerable amount of work that is required for all of those grants that we administer. We already are operating on a lean budget. We have worked with as skeleton of a staff as we can to be able to process some 45,000 payments annually for over 1,000 sub-grantees, and in addition to, it's not just processing payments, it's making sure that all of our partners are doing what they have to do to meet eligibility requirements, whether it's the accountability court partners or the partners in our other grant programs. And if we try to trim that staff, unfortunately, we'll get to the place that we can't process and get payments out the door in a timely manner to keep our partners even going. If cuts to those programs would mean that we would have less programs in place and less work to do, we might be able to look at that. But the reality is it's not reducing the amount of work that has to be done, the amount of checks that has to be cut, the amount of accountability. All of those things are still the same. It may be smaller amounts, but it's the same workload. So we have cut a couple of positions. We were in the process of trying to bring on a couple of positions that we just decided there's absolutely no way you can bring on any other positions now. So the workload is pretty tight with our staff, and I don't think there's room for us to reduce any more staff at this point.
Well, you're not reducing, I think there was maybe one position, but I don't think any of those were. So can you speak to, I know that there has been an expansion. Traditionally speaking, the CJCC has been more of a funder of programs. You know, you've referenced the many payments that you make to our community partners. Can you speak to a lot of the policy and programmatic initiatives that y'all have actually launched in the last, say, 2 or 3 years, and kind of the workload that's taking up some of those staff members, and were any cuts to those sorts of programs considered?
Let me mention one additional thing. We have a $1.27 million admin budget. When you look at a $1.27 admin budget in an agency that's putting out $154 million, and the number of staff that we have at CJCC that's paid for out of the $30 million in accountability court funds, we have one staff person paid for out of that CACJ budget on staff at CJCC. So for us to take additional cuts means that we either eliminate the only staff position we have out of accountability court budget, or we eliminate our entire administration. And we still don't get there by eliminating the entire administration. I'm sorry, could you repeat the question?
Well, in recent years, the CJCC has expanded into policy and programmatic initiatives. And I was wondering if there was any contemplation of a contraction of some of those services to alleviate some of the cuts.
Contraction of the programmatic services?
Mm-hmm.
The services that we've expanded over the last several years
Mm-hmm.
Are human trafficking, sexual assault kit initiative. We've expanded some of our domestic violence shelter, our domestic violence programs. And when we start contracting, the reality is when we start contracting, wherever we contract, we're going to impact Georgians. There's no question about that. There's no way you can get around it. So you have to look at the priorities of those contractions. And we are comfortable with the governor's priorities. I think the governor has made it very clear where his priorities are. We have worked to secure competitive grants for school safety, for gang initiatives, for human trafficking. We're working to make sure that we're continuing to provide the services needed for our sexual assault victims and human trafficking victims and domestic violence victims. And if we start contracting, those are the areas where we're going to have to contract.
And I am, unfortunately, you've been in these shoes. You have to make some tough choices. The elimination of 127 CPS workers will obviously have an impact. The contraction and the reduction in the grants to our accountability courts, I think we've seen very hard numbers that demonstrate the impact that will have. So obviously, cuts in general impact. Anyway, thank you. I appreciate it.
When I was on this committee, we were cutting far more than 4% and 6%. So I appreciate it, and I understand the place that you're in and the difficulties of the job that you have, and I certainly appreciate that responsibility.
All right, Representative Holcomb.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good afternoon, Mr. Neal.
In
addition to what you said with respect to having to administer the state grants, isn't it true that you also have the obligation to make sure that we're complying with the grant obligations for those that the state receives funds for, and that
Yes.
that is a burden in terms of work and labor and everything else?
Yes, absolutely.
The other question that I have, and this is maybe a little bit more long-term, but having such an appreciation for both what your agency does and the personnel, in particular, I think Amy Hutzel and Liz Flowers are rock stars. They work incredibly hard, very responsive. Is there any danger of y'all losing some of your funds from outside sources in either the short or near term for services and in areas that we want to make sure that they continue? If that makes sense, what I'm trying to ask.
Right.
Is, in other words, are there possibilities of cliffs in terms of funding that we should be aware of, or is that really not a concern, that the other dollars are pretty stable?
So there is, with the federal VOCA funds, if you followed the allocations over the last several years with VOCA funds, a couple of years ago we received a little over $100 million VOCA funds. Those funds go out to the victims of crime, typically to sexual assault and domestic violence and child advocacy centers, victim advocates, VWAP programs, all impacted by some of those dollars. Last year it was $74 million, and this year I think it's going to be about $54 million. So that's a significant cut in those federal funds. Am I concerned that what we're doing with this budget is going to have an impact on our ability? No, not at all. We'll be able to continue to do what we've been doing. But there is, over the last couple of years, there's been a clear cutback from the federal government in those critical victim services funds.
Okay, thank you. The only other thing I'll say very quickly is, from my perspective, I do see some real movement in terms of the prosecutions, and the work that we've been doing in terms of testing is starting to to pay off. And I'd certainly like to see more prosecutions, but they are coming.
Thank you. If I could just mention one more thing. Our staff has done a very good job managing those VOCA funds. When we got $104 million 2 years ago, we didn't act like that we were going to be getting $104 million going forward. We anticipated that would be reduced, so we were careful in how we used that. And in spite of the fact that we went from $74 million last year to $54 million this year, we're in a place to where we're not going to have to cut because of how careful we were and the way we allocated those funds previously. If it stays at $54 million, we're going to have to look at cuts down the road, but we should be able to sustain where we are for probably 3 years, even based on those cuts to 54 because of the prudence of the staff.
Thank you, Jay. Appreciate the presentation. Thank you, judges. Judge Gotham, do you have what? You wanted to make a closing argument, is that right?
Yeah. Taylor has more statistics that she can give you about all sorts of things, including the number of participants that would be reduced if the
Representative Holton has a question, and then I'm going to let you get that impassioned.
Okay, impassioned, yes.
Thank you. I'm always interested to hear statements about statistics and return on investment and reduction of recidivism rates. But I'd like to know the methodology that was used. Was it a sample? Was it a full analysis of the entire data set? What years were used? Is it a 3-year time period? Is it longer? I think those level of details matter so we can evaluate that.
This is the detail person.
We have a full report that explains the methodology that we would be happy to discuss with you and or send to you, whichever you
I'd like to
prefer.
see it. Thanks.
Absolutely.
Any other questions that especially about numbers that Taylor can
No,
answer?
Taylor, if you just send that to Courtney and to Representative Holcomb, but Courtney will distribute it to the entire subcommittee.
2 things I want to say. One is that we have enjoyed a very good partnership with CJCC over the last 8 years, and we do appreciate the work that they've done for us and with us. One of the statistics that we don't currently keep, but that we are talking about keeping, is the number of participants in accountability courts who are victims of domestic violence, who are victims of sexual assault, who are victims of child abuse. I can tell you from 15 years of presiding over a mental health court and 5 years of presiding over a veterans treatment court that the vast majority, and I would venture to say it's a very high percentage of our participants, have come from significant trauma, and that trauma involves sexual violence, domestic violence, and so that particular piece of information is something that we all know anecdotally, and we are going to start to collect that data as well, so you can see that. But we know that, and I can tell you that I would guess the number is more like 85 to 90%. Judge Weaver and Judge Mingledorf and Judge Barker, I'm sure, can back me up on that. We do not take in people that have 7 deadly sins. We do not take people in that have sex offenses. So we are dealing with people that have a lot of trauma that will become, if they graduate, productive members of the society and will give back in ways that we are giving them an opportunity to do now. So thank you for listening to us and being so informed about our numbers already. We really appreciate that. Thank you, Chairman Welch, always for the hard work that you do.
Judge, thank you, members of the committee. We have given a lot of time to this particular subject matter, but I do want to afford the committee members a break. So we're going to take about a 10-minute break. See you back here at 3:25, and we'll start right back up there with pardons and paroles.